I never imagined that my best friend's ordinary wedding would turn into a catastrophe for my entire life. Here's what happened. The suitcase sat open on the bed, its contents spilling out like secrets unguarded. I'd been methodically packing for the past 20 minutes, but my hands moved on autopilot. This trip was supposed to be our lifeline. 1 week in the mountains, a chance to reconnect, to smooth over the jagged edges that had worn us thin. Angelica moved past me, her presence more an electric charge than a shared space. She said nothing, just folded a sweater into her bag with the precision of someone hiding behind tasks. Her silence was the new normal, not the comfortable quiet of shared understanding, but a void, one we had let grow unchecked. I glanced at her, half expecting her to break it. She didn't. "Babe, you think we'll have time to check out that little cafe I showed you?" I ventured. She didn't look up, just hummed in a way that felt dismissive. Another small rejection, added to the pile. I swallowed my irritation and zipped up my suitcase, the sound slicing through the tension. The ringing of my phone was almost a relief. I reached for it, my best friend Adam's name flashing across the screen. A grin tugged at the corner of my mouth. Adams hadn't called in months. Our schedule's a testament to lives growing apart. "Adams," I greeted, the warmth in my voice undeniable. "What's up, man?" His response was a burst of joy I hadn't heard in years. "Josh, you're not going to believe this. I'm getting married. Sunday." The words hung there, unexpected and thrilling. My chest tightened with an odd cocktail of happiness and hesitation. I glanced at Angelica, who had paused mid-fold, her brow furrowed as she tried to decipher my expression. "That's amazing news," I said, stalling as my mind raced. "Sunday, though? That's 2 days away. We've got a flight in 2 hours." Adams didn't let me finish. "Man, you've got to be there. You and Angelica both. It wouldn't feel right without you." His excitement was infectious, but the timing couldn't have been worse. My grip on the phone tightened, and the room seemed to shrink around me. Angelica straightened, her arms crossed. "What's going on?" she asked, her tone clipped. I held her gaze, my pulse quickening. "Adams is getting married. Sunday. He wants us there?" Her face froze in a mask of disbelief. "What? We're supposed to leave for the mountains in 2 hours." "I know," I said quickly, trying to smooth the tension before it hardened. "But it's Adams. We can't miss his wedding." Her eyes narrowed, the unspoken argument already brewing between us. For a moment, I wanted to drop the phone, to pretend this call had never happened. But I couldn't. Adams had been there for me when no one else was, and his voice on the other end of the line reminded me of a simpler time, a time before everything with Angelica became a battlefield of misunderstandings. "We'll come," I said finally. Angelica's jaw tightened. "Excuse me?" I mouthed later to her, but she turned away sharply, her frustration palpable. Adams didn't notice. He laughed, his relief pouring through the speaker. "You're the best, man. I'll send you the details." The call ended, and the silence in the room roared back to life. Angelica's shoulders were stiff, her hands clenched into fists at her sides. "You didn't even ask me," she said, her voice low and trembling with anger. "I didn't have to," I replied, the words leaving my mouth before I could stop them. Her eyes flashed, and for a moment, I thought she might yell. But she didn't. Instead, she shook her head and walked out of the room, the echo of her retreating footsteps heavier than any argument we'd ever had. I stood there, rooted in place, the weight of my decision pressing down on me. I thought we were just going to a wedding. I had no idea the detour we were about to take would unravel everything. The door slammed somewhere in the house, rattling the silence I'd been trying to hold together. Angelica's voice followed, sharp and rising like a storm gathering speed. "I'm not going to his wedding. Do you hear me? I don't want to go." Her words lashed out, reverberating through the hallway. I flinched, setting the suitcase on the floor as I stepped out into the living room where she paced, her arms flailing as if trying to physically shake off the idea. "You don't understand," she cried, spinning to face me. Her eyes were wild, her cheeks flushed with fury. "I want to go to the mountains, Josh. I don't care about this stupid wedding. Why did you even say yes?" Her voice cracked, and I saw something deeper than anger. It was pain, old and raw, stirred up from somewhere I didn't understand. Angelica, it's Adams. He's my best friend, I started, trying to keep my tone calm, measured. We've known each other since. I don't care, she cut me off, tears brimming now, her fists clenched at her sides. You don't get it, do you? You want me to go watch him? Him get married? After everything he did to me? She paused, her chest heaving. He's the one who broke me, Josh. He left me humiliated, like I was nothing. And now you're asking me to go celebrate him? To clap and smile and pretend like it didn't happen? I stood frozen, her words sinking in like lead weights. Adams? I never heard her mention him in that context. My mind raced, trying to piece together fragments of stories she'd shared over the years, but there was nothing. Not even a hint. Angelica, I began, but she turned away, pressing her hands to her face. I can't believe this, she muttered, pacing again. You're supposed to be on my side. I've been waiting weeks for this trip. Weeks, Josh. Do you have any idea how much I need this? We need this? I sighed, running a hand through my hair. I know, and I want to go too. But it's just one day. We'll go to the wedding on Sunday, and then head to the mountains after. I'll book new tickets for Tuesday morning. It'll be fine. She stopped mid-step, spinning back toward me, her eyes narrowing. Fine? Her laugh was bitter, humorless. It's not fine. You're putting him above us, above me. Do you even care how this feels? Of course I care, I said, my voice rising despite my effort to stay composed. But this is Adams. He's been there for me more times than I can count. I can't just... He's your friend, she interrupted, her voice dripping with venom. And he's my ex. Does that even register for you? I faltered. The words hung in the air, heavy and unavoidable. I didn't know what to say. I wanted to defend Adams, to explain that this wasn't about picking sides, but every word that came to mind felt like a landmine waiting to detonate. For the next hour, we circled the same argument, her anger flaring every time I tried to offer a solution. I promised her the mountains, reassured her that the trip would still happen. I even suggested cutting the wedding short, leaving immediately afterward. But nothing worked. She was immovable, her frustration like a wall I couldn't climb. Until suddenly, something shifted. Angelica stopped pacing, her hands dropping to her sides. Her shoulders straightened, and she took a deep, shuddering breath. The anger in her eyes dimmed, replaced by something I couldn't quite read. She tilted her head, looking at me with an expression that was almost calm. Fine, she said, her tone eerily steady. Fine, I'll go to this wedding. You win? The words caught me off guard. Really? She smirked, a bitter edge to her expression. Why not? It's been ages since I've been to a wedding. Could be fun, right? She walked past me toward the bedroom, her voice trailing behind her. Might even get the chance to finally get back at that fool. Angelica, I said, following her. You don't need to get back at anyone. Whatever happened between you two, it's over. You moved on. You've got nothing to prove. She paused at the doorway, glancing over her shoulder with a look that was equal parts defiance and amusement. You think so? She asked, raising an eyebrow. We'll see. And with that, she disappeared into the room, leaving me standing there, my heart pounding with an unease I couldn't shake. Her words lingered long after she disappeared into the bedroom, chilling me with their strange mix of defiance and resolve. I never thought I would go to that fool's wedding, she had muttered, her voice barely audible, but laced with something I couldn't quite name. It wasn't anger. Not exactly. It was closer to determination, like a soldier preparing for battle. I shook my head, trying to dismiss the unease crawling over my skin. Angelica was fiery. That wasn't news. But this was something else. I didn't have time to dwell on it. Instead, I grabbed my wallet and keys, deciding to handle the one task I could control, getting an envelope for the wedding gift. The shop was quiet, and as I browsed through shelves of greeting cards and envelopes, I found myself replaying her words. Was this really a good idea? It was too late to back out now. My loyalty to Adams demanded I show up, but Angelica's involvement was beginning to feel like a volatile ingredient added to an already precarious mix. By the time I got home, The house was eerily quiet. For a moment, I thought Angelica might have left again, still fuming. But then I heard the muffled rustle of fabric from our bedroom. Curious, I made my way down the hall, pushing the door open just enough to peer inside. She was standing in front of the full-length mirror, her hair tied back and a faint flush on her cheeks. Dresses were scattered across the bed in a chaotic display of vibrant colors and sleek fabrics. She held up a red dress against her body, turning this way and that, then tossed it aside for a black one. "Josh," she called out suddenly, her voice breaking the quiet. "Josh, come here. I need your opinion." I stepped inside, the envelope still in my hand, and leaned against the doorframe. "What's up?" She held up two dresses, one in each hand, the red one and a pristine white gown I didn't even remember her owning. "Which one?" she asked, her voice alight with energy. "The red or the black? Or maybe the white?" "The white," I said without hesitation, grinning. Her eyes lit up, and she twirled the white dress in front of her before tossing the others back onto the bed. "Good choice," she said, her tone teasing. "I want to look better than that drug addict he's marrying. I want him to regret everything." Her words hit me like a slap, and, for a moment, I didn't know whether to laugh or be concerned. The intensity in her tone, the sharp edge of competitiveness, it was surreal. "You're joking, right?" I asked, trying to keep my voice light. She didn't answer directly. Instead, she held the dress up again, admiring herself in the mirror. "I want him to be jealous, Josh. Don't you think it would be fun? For him to see what he lost?" I bit back a laugh, even as a nervous knot tightened in my chest. "Angelica, you're going to a wedding, not a war. You don't need to prove anything." She turned to me, her lips curving into a mischievous smile. "Maybe I do. Maybe I just want to remind him of what he threw away." I shook my head, chuckling despite myself. "You're something else, you know that?" Her grin widened, and for the first time in weeks, there was a spark of excitement in her eyes. A spark I hadn't seen in far too long. She seemed genuinely alive, and as strange as her motivation was, I couldn't deny how captivating it was to watch her. It was only Friday, and the wedding wasn't until Sunday, but she was already diving headfirst into preparations. Her mood had shifted entirely, and I couldn't tell if it was a good thing or a warning sign. Still, as she debated which shoes matched the white dress, her energy was infectious. I leaned back against the wall, arms crossed, and watched her. Whatever storm was brewing, I'd face it when it came. For now, seeing Angelica like this, passionate and fiery, was strangely comforting. Even if her reasons were less than pure. Saturday arrived with a quiet urgency, the kind that creeps up on you and reminds you that you're running out of time. Angelica had been ready since sunrise, her dress hanging on the back of the closet door like a trophy. She'd spent most of the morning perfecting the details: shoes, jewelry, even the faintest scent of a new perfume I'd never smelled before. She was glowing, a strange mix of anticipation and mischief that had me both amused and on edge. "Your turn," she said, leaning against the doorframe as I shuffled through the closet. "You can't look like a disaster standing next to me tomorrow." I pulled out the suit I'd worn to our wedding 5 years ago, still neatly folded in its garment bag. "This'll do," I said, more to myself than to her. Angelica's laugh was sharp and sudden. "That thing? Good luck fitting into it now." Ignoring her, I unzipped the bag and shrugged on the jacket. It felt tighter than I remembered, the fabric straining against my shoulders. "It's fine," I muttered, adjusting the lapels. "Yeah, fine," she snorted, crossing her arms. "You can't even button it." I glanced down, tugging at the front of the jacket. She wasn't wrong. The buttons were stubbornly resisting. "It's just snug," I said defensively. "Snug," Angelica repeated, her laughter bubbling over. "Josh, you look like you're auditioning for a kid's circus act." I shot her a playful glare, bending over to grab the pants from the bed. As I did, a sharp rip echoed through the room. I froze. Angelica clutched her stomach, doubling over with laughter. "Oh my God," she managed between gasps. "Did you just tear your wedding suit?" I looked down, horrified to see a long split running down the back of the jacket. "It's not funny," I grumbled. but her laughter was infectious. I couldn't help but crack a smile as I peeled off the ruined jacket. "We need to get you a new suit," she said, still giggling. And fast. The department store was crowded, buzzing with weekend shoppers. Angelica led the charge, pulling me from rack to rack in search of something that wouldn't make me look like a joke. "Try this," she said, tossing me a sleek black suit. I ducked into the fitting room and emerged minutes later, the jacket straining across my chest. Angelica's laughter resumed immediately. "You're going to pop the buttons off that one too," she said, wiping a tear from her eye. We scoured the store, but every suit was either too tight or unavailable in my size. The sales clerk offered to tailor one, but the timeline was impossible. "We can have it ready by Wednesday," he said apologetically. "Wednesday?" I repeated, exasperated. "The wedding's tomorrow." Angelica held up a navy blue suit that looked oversized, to put it kindly. "What about this one?" she asked, stifling a laugh. "It's 2 sizes too big," I said flatly. She grinned. "It's either this or show up in jeans." Reluctantly, I bought the suit. It hung on me like a deflated balloon, the sleeves brushing my knuckles and the pants pooling at my ankles despite the quick alterations. Angelica couldn't stop laughing on the drive home. "You're going to be the life of the party," she teased. "People are going to think you're the entertainment." I managed a weak smile, my frustration simmering beneath the surface. That night, the stress finally caught up with me. I drifted off to sleep, the sound of Angelica humming in the bathroom lulling me into uneasy dreams. The nightmare came out of nowhere, a disjointed, surreal chaos that blurred the lines between fear and reality. I was standing in a church, surrounded by strangers, their faces warped and unrecognizable. Angelica stood at the altar, but she wasn't waiting for me. She was laughing, holding hands with someone else, someone whose face I couldn't see. The crowd pointed at me, their laughter growing louder and louder until it drowned out every other sound. My oversized suit swallowed me whole, the fabric tightening like a straitjacket. I screamed, trying to break free, but my voice was lost in the cacophony. I bolted upright, gasping for air. "Josh!" Angelica's voice was sharp with alarm. She was sitting up beside me, her hand on my arm. "What's wrong? You're screaming." I struggled to catch my breath, my heart pounding like a drum. "It was just a nightmare," I croaked, wiping the sweat from my brow. Angelica reached for the drawer, pulling out a small bottle of pills. "Take this," she said, handing me a sedative. "You're too wound up. You'll feel better in the morning." I swallowed the pill and lay back down, her hand resting lightly on my chest. "You're okay," she murmured, her voice soft now, almost soothing. "Just a bad dream." The medication worked quickly, pulling me into a deep, dreamless sleep. But even as I drifted off, the unease lingered like a shadow in the corners of my mind. Morning sunlight poured through the blinds, warm and relentless. I stirred awake, stretching off the remnants of last night's nightmare. The first sound I heard wasn't the birds outside or the quiet hum of the city waking up. It was Angelica, already rustling around in the wardrobe. "This is the day," she said without turning around, her voice filled with icy determination. "When I go to this fool's wedding." I propped myself up, watching as she pulled her white dress from its hanger, smoothing it with deliberate precision. "Morning to you too," I mumbled, swinging my legs out of bed. By the time we were dressed, the contrast between us couldn't have been starker. Angelica was stunning. The white dress hugged her figure perfectly, her hair swept up in a way that left me momentarily speechless. And then there was me. I stood in front of the mirror, drowning in the oversized suit. The jacket hung off my shoulders, the sleeves covering half my hands, and the pants threatened to trip me with every step. Angelica's laughter echoed through the room as she fixed her earrings. "You really are going to be the life of the party," she teased, biting back another giggle. "Glad you find this so funny," I muttered, adjusting the too loose tie. When we arrived at Adam's house, the wedding preparations were in full swing. Guests milled about, the hum of conversation mingling with soft music from somewhere inside. Adam stood at the entrance with his fiancée, a picture-perfect couple greeting everyone with practiced smiles. Angelica stiffened the moment she saw him. Her eyes darkened, her lips pressing into a thin line as she stared at him like a predator sizing up prey. I tried to break the tension by walking ahead, the envelope in my hand feeling heavier with every step. "Josh! Angelica!" Adams greeted us warmly, his smile widening as I approached. "I'm so glad you both could make it." "Congratulations, man," I said, extending the envelope. Adams took it with both hands, his gaze flickering briefly to Angelica. His smile faltered for just a second before he spoke again. "Angelica, I'm sorry. For everything. Thank you for coming to my wedding." Her jaw tightened, but she said nothing, her stare locked on his like she was daring him to crumble. As we walked away, she turned to me, her voice a low hiss. "Why did you give him that envelope? He doesn't deserve it." I ignored her, forcing a neutral expression as we passed groups of guests. But I couldn't help noticing the stares. Some curious, some amused, all fixed on me. "Great," I muttered under my breath. "I look like a damn clown." Angelica smirked, clearly unbothered by my predicament. I, on the other hand, felt every inch of my oversized suit like a spotlight shining directly on my humiliation. My discomfort peaked when a man I barely recognized approached me with a grin. "Excuse me," he said, chuckling. "Are you the toastmaster for the wedding?" Angelica nearly choked on her laughter. I forced a tight smile, shaking my head. "No, just a guest." "Well," he said, still grinning, "you certainly look the part." I clenched my fists, willing the ground to swallow me whole. Angelica, of course, found this endlessly entertaining, though her mood soured quickly as we moved further into the crowd. "I'd rather not be here," she whispered sharply, her tone cutting. "I should have stayed home." I didn't respond. What was there to say? Every glance, every whispered conversation seemed to orbit around us. Her beauty, my absurd suit, the tension hanging between her and Adams like a storm cloud. As we stood among the guests, Angelica's occasional mutterings cut through the low hum of the crowd. "This fool," she said under her breath, her gaze darting toward Adams and his fiancée. "I hope he's miserable." I sighed, wishing I could shrink into the fabric drowning me. But there was no escape. Not from the stares, not from Angelica's simmering anger, and certainly not from the feeling that this day was going to spiral into something far worse. The wedding was in full swing, a whirlwind of laughter, clinking glasses, and bodies swaying to the music. The dance floor was alive, the guests lost in the energy of the evening. I stood at the edge of it all, feeling out of place in my oversized suit. Angelica was beside me, her sharp eyes scanning the room, her fingers loosely wrapped around a half-empty bottle of wine. She'd drunk just enough to let her sharper thoughts slip out, and I could sense her simmering unease beneath the surface. "Josh!" Adams appeared out of nowhere, his easy smile still intact despite the whirlwind of guests. He clapped a hand on my shoulder, looking me up and down. "Man, I have to say, that suit is unforgettable. For a second, I thought you were the toastmaster." Angelica snorted beside me, failing to hide her smirk. My cheeks burned, but I forced a laugh. "Guess I should have brought a microphone," I muttered, trying to keep it light. Adams turned to her then, his expression softening. "Angelica," he began, his voice dropping into a tone that suggested this was a moment he'd rehearsed. "I just wanted to say, I'm sorry. For everything. Back then, I was a mess. I know I hurt you, and I've regretted it every day since." Her grip on the bottle tightened, and I saw the familiar fire ignite in her eyes. "You're sorry?" she repeated, her voice louder than necessary. Heads began to turn, curious glances darting our way. "You're a fool, Adams. A total fool." I felt my stomach drop. "Angelica," I said softly, trying to steer her back from the edge, but she wasn't listening. "If it wasn't for Josh," she continued, gesturing wildly with the wine bottle, "I wouldn't even be here. Do you get that? I wouldn't set one foot in this circus if it weren't for him." Adams opened his mouth to respond, but Angelica wasn't finished. Her movements were sharp and unsteady, her words spilling out like the wine that suddenly poured from the bottle she tipped over his suit. Gasps rippled through the crowd as Adams stood there, drenched and blinking in surprise. For a moment, I thought he might lash out, but instead, he let out a short, dry laugh. "It happens," he said, shaking his head. "Don't worry about it. I'll come talk to you later." He walked off toward the bathroom, leaving Angelica standing there with a smug look on her face, holding the nearly empty bottle. "What are you doing?" I hissed, my face flushed with embarrassment. The weight of dozens of eyes on us was suffocating. "It's under control," she said breezily, wiping her hand on her dress as if nothing had happened. "Under control?" I thought. That was anything but. She turned back to me, her gaze drifting toward Adam's retreating figure. For a moment, her expression softened, her lips curling into a strange, wistful smile. "He's still beautiful," she said suddenly, her voice quieter now. "That junkie's still so damn beautiful." Her words hit me like a slap. I clenched my jaw, unsure whether to argue or let it slide. "And his fiancée," she added, her voice tinged with something I couldn't quite place. "She's beautiful too." "We're beautiful too," I said quickly, forcing a smile I didn't feel. "Don't forget that." She looked at me, her gaze softening slightly. Then she nodded, a grin spreading across her face. "You're right. We are better than them." Her hand reached out to adjust my ill-fitting tie, her touch surprisingly tender. "And your suit. Your ridiculous suit. It's beautiful too." I couldn't tell if she was teasing me or trying to reassure herself. Either way, I nodded, wrapping an arm around her waist as if that simple act could ground the chaos swirling around us. The night wasn't over yet, and I had a feeling things were only going to get messy. The air between us hung heavy after Angelica's outburst. For a few minutes, we stood in silence, surrounded by the distant hum of laughter and music. Her earlier bravado seemed to have mellowed, though her fingers still played with the stem of the empty wine bottle. Then, she turned to me with a faint smirk. "I need some air, or maybe just a walk." "Where to?" I asked cautiously, but she was already slipping through the crowd, her white dress trailing behind her like a warning flag. I caught sight of her heading toward the hallway, the direction of the bathrooms, and Adam's. My stomach tightened. "Angelica," I called after her, but she didn't turn around. Instinct took over. I followed her, staying far enough back to avoid suspicion. She reached the bathroom door and paused for a moment before pushing it open and disappearing inside. I crept closer, my heart hammering in my chest. Angelica was unpredictable at the best of times, and I wasn't sure what she had planned for Adams. I positioned myself quietly by the door, straining to hear. "Well, Adams," came Angelica's voice, sharp and deliberate. "Do you want to apologize?" "Yes, apologize. I'm waiting." There was a pause, and then Adams spoke, his tone subdued and earnest. "I'm sorry, Angelica. Truly. For everything. I was awful to you, and you didn't deserve any of it." The sincerity in his voice was surprising. Even I felt a pang of sympathy for him, a rare occurrence. Before I could eavesdrop further, I felt a tap on my shoulder. Startled, I turned to see Adam's fiancée standing there, her expression warm and amused. "Josh, right?" she said, her voice light. I nodded, stepping away from the door. "Yes. Hi. Something I can do for you?" "I just wanted to say I love your suit," she said, her smile widening. "It's bold. Really makes a statement." I wasn't sure if she was joking or being kind, but I offered a sheepish grin. "Thanks. Not exactly what I planned, but here we are." She laughed, the sound genuine, and suddenly the tension of the evening felt lighter. We started talking, the conversation flowing easily. She asked about how I knew Adams, shared stories about the chaos of planning the wedding, and before I knew it, we were on the dance floor. The music slowed to a waltz, and she extended a hand. "Shall we?" Sure," I said, caught off guard but too polite to refuse. My oversized sleeves made the dance feel awkward, but she was gracious, leading with enough confidence for the both of us. We circled the floor, laughing as we stumbled through the steps. It felt like a strange escape from the brewing storm with Angelica. But as the minutes ticked by, a nagging thought crept into my mind. Where was she? 30 minutes had passed since I'd last seen her. My laughter faded as I scanned the room. realizing she hadn't returned from her walk. My chest tightened with unease. "Something wrong?" Adam's fiancée asked, tilting her head. I just need to check on something," I said quickly, excusing myself. I made my way back to the hallway, the sense of urgency growing with every step. What had Angelica done? Had she pushed Adams too far? Or worse, had she done something reckless in her drunken state? The bathroom door loomed ahead, slightly ajar. My pulse quickened as I approached, bracing myself for whatever I might find on the other side. The bathroom was quiet, save for the soft hum of the music spilling in from the reception. I stood outside the slightly ajar door, hesitating. My gut twisted, every instinct screaming that something was wrong. Taking a deep breath, I pushed the door open, stepping inside. At first, I heard nothing. Then came the muffled sounds, rhythmic and unmistakable. My blood froze. "Oh yeah." Angelica's voice floated out, low and breathless. It was coming from one of the stalls. My hands clenched into fists, my mind struggling to process what I was hearing. Without thinking, I yelled, my voice cracking with fury. "Angelica, what are you doing? Get out here now!" There was a scramble inside the stall, followed by frantic whispers. Rage surged through me, and I slammed my shoulder into the door. It didn't budge. I kicked it hard, the flimsy lock giving way as the door flew open. The scene before me was like something out of a nightmare. Adam sat on the toilet, his clothes in a heap around him. Angelica was on his lap, her dress bunched around her thighs. They both froze, their eyes wide with shock as they registered my presence. "This is how you apologize?" I screamed, my voice raw and shaking. "This is what you wanted, Angelica? What about me? I trusted you." Angelica scrambled off Adams, yanking her dress down, her face pale and panicked. "Josh, it's not what you think. Please, let me explain." I laughed bitterly, my hands shaking as I pointed at her. "Explain? You're sitting on him." "Angelica, what's there to explain?" She stepped toward me, her hands outstretched, trembling. "Josh, I swear, I didn't mean for this to happen. It was Adams. He pushed me against the wall, and it all just—" Adams cut in, his voice defensive. "That's not what happened." "Shut up!" I roared, glaring at him. "You're apologizing like this? Really?" Angelica grabbed my arm, tears streaming down her face. "Josh, please, you know me. You know I wouldn't. This isn't me." I shook her off, stepping back as the bathroom door swung open again. Adam's fiancée stood there, her face pale and stricken. Behind her, the sounds of laughter and music abruptly quieted, replaced by murmurs of confusion. The fiancée took one look at the scene and broke down, her sobs echoing in the tiled room. What is this?" she choked out, her voice trembling. "Adams, what the hell are you doing?" The commotion drew a crowd. Guests flooded the hallway, their shocked faces peering into the bathroom. Whispers turned into gasps, and then into shouting. Adams tried to step forward, his hands raised as if to calm her. "It's not what it looks like, okay? Nothing happened." Angelica was just. "Don't you dare," the bride shouted, cutting him off. Her face twisted with anger, her voice rising as she grabbed a microphone from a nearby stand. "Listen up, everyone," she shouted, her voice cracking with grief. "That fool, that stupid Angelica cheated on my fiancé at our wedding." The crowd gasped in unison, the chaos erupting into shouts and accusations. Angelica stood frozen beside me, her hands clasped tightly together. "Josh, please, let's just leave." "I'm sorry. I didn't mean it," she whispered, her voice breaking. But the guests weren't done. One man pointed at me, his face twisted with contempt. "Get out of here, clown. You're a joke." And so is she. Another voice chimed in, louder. "You ruined this wedding. Both of you, get out." They surged toward us, their anger palpable. Angelica clung to my arm, pleading with me to stay calm, but I couldn't process her words. All I could hear was the roar of the crowd and the fiancé's sobs. Someone shoved me, and I stumbled back, my oversized suit making me feel more ridiculous than ever. Another man threw a plastic cup, the drink splashing against my chest. "Get out," they chanted, their voices growing louder. Adam's fiancée glared at us, her face streaked with tears. "Take your slut and your clown suit and leave. You've done enough damage." I turned, pushing through the crowd, my face burning with humiliation. Angelica followed close behind, still begging me to listen, to forgive her. But I couldn't. The last thing I heard as we stumbled into the cool night air was the fiancée's voice, trembling with rage. "This day was supposed to be perfect," she screamed. "And you ruined it." The door slammed shut behind us, silencing the chaos inside. I stood there, the reality of what had just happened sinking in like a lead weight. My marriage, my friendship with Adams, my dignity, it all lay in ruins. Angelica reached for my hand, her voice small and broken. "Josh, please." I pulled away, staring straight ahead as we walked into the dark, away from the wreckage of the day. The sound of Adam's fiancée's cries echoed in my mind as we drove away. Angelica sat beside me, her face streaked with tears, her trembling hands gripping her lap. I gripped the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles turned white, my chest heaving with the effort to keep my composure. "Why?" I finally yelled, the word tearing out of me like a jagged blade. "Why did you cheat on me, Angelica? You've ruined everything. Not just us, but this stupid wedding." She flinched as if my words were physical blows. "I'm sorry," she whispered, her voice breaking. "Josh, I'm so sorry." "Sorry," I snapped, glancing at her for a brief moment before returning my eyes to the road. "You're sorry? Everyone hates us now. Angelica, they'll never forget this. How could we ever move on from this?" Her sobs grew louder, her shoulders shaking as she tried to explain. "He apologized. He said he loved me more than his fiancée. And then he pushed me against the wall. I didn't want it, Josh, I didn't, but it just happened." I slammed my palm against the steering wheel. Shit, I shouted, the rage bubbling over. "What am I supposed to do, Angelica? Just forgive you like that? And what if you cheat on me again? If I hadn't walked in, would you have even told me?" "I swear I would have told you," she cried, reaching out for me, but I pulled away. "I can't trust you anymore," I roared, the weight of those words hitting me as hard as they did her. There was a long, agonizing silence. Her tears were the only sound, mixing with the hum of the tires on the road. Finally, I sighed, my voice low and trembling. "Angelica, I love you. God, I love you so much. But this destroys me. It destroys my principles." She didn't respond, just cried harder, her hands covering her face. When we pulled into the driveway, I couldn't bear to go inside. Every inch of the house felt tainted, like it would suffocate me with reminders of what had happened. Without a word, I grabbed a bag and left for a hotel. Angelica stood at the door, her hands clasped, her lips forming silent pleas, but I couldn't look at her. The hotel became my refuge for the next month. I buried myself in work, trying to drown out the memories, the anger, the betrayal. Angelica texted me daily, asking for forgiveness, begging for a chance to explain further, but I couldn't bring myself to answer most of the time. Adams and his fiancée reached out too. Well, his ex-fiancée now. She sent long, scathing messages blaming us for destroying her relationship. Adams wrote apologizing, trying to explain, but I blocked him. Whatever he had to say, I didn't want to hear it. The worst part was the blame. People in our town whispered about us, their judgment clear in every interaction. I heard them call me a fool, a clown who let his wife and his friend ruin everything. The shame was unbearable. One day, Angelica showed up at my hotel. Her face was pale, her eyes sunken from weeks of sleepless nights. She fell to her knees at the door, her voice trembling as she begged me. "Please, Josh, I'll do anything. Counseling, therapy, anything to make this right. Please, just give me a chance." Her words hung in the air, and for the first time, I saw something I couldn't ignore: sincerity. Her regret wasn't just words. It was in her every movement, her every breath. I told her I'd think about it, and I did, For an entire week, I replayed everything in my mind, every painful detail, every moment of betrayal. But in the end, I couldn't shake one truth. I still loved her. We moved to a new town, leaving behind the toxic whispers and judgmental stares. The place we had called home for 5 years was now a graveyard of trust, littered with the wreckage of what had once been. Angelica started counseling, just as she promised. She threw herself into rebuilding what she had broken, and while I tried to let go of my anger, it wasn't easy. Every time I looked at her, I saw Adams, the bathroom, the betrayal. But I also saw her fighting to fix it, to prove that this wasn't who she wanted to be. 3 months have passed, and I'm sitting here with Angelica as I write this. She's next to me, her hand resting lightly on my arm. I see her differently now, not just as my wife, but as someone who is deeply flawed, someone who made a terrible mistake, but is trying desperately to make amends. I know she didn't want it to happen. If she had, she wouldn't have asked for forgiveness the way she did. She wouldn't be here now, trying so hard to rebuild our lives. As for Adams, his life is a mess. His ex-fiancée refuses to reconcile, even though she's pregnant with his child. She doesn't even want to see him, and honestly, I don't blame her. Forgiveness isn't easy. It's messy and painful, and sometimes feels impossible. But for now, I'm choosing to believe that people can change, that Angelica can change. And if she ever breaks this trust again, I know what I have to do. But for now, we're trying. For now, we're holding on.